Hey everyone, it's Christian from The Gamer, and in this Arc Raiders video, we'll be going over our guide for the ultimate skill tree ahead of the upcoming expedition in early 2026. We'll also be going over why individual skills are important, as well as detailed best practices for allotting skill points from the early game all the way into the late game. Quick disclaimer before we dive into this video, it's worth mentioning that everyone has a different philosophy for how they choose to play Arc Raiders, which greatly determines the final shape of the skill tree. Some players prefer maxed out mobility and conditioning skills to enhance the PvP, while others focus on survival for a better looting and PvE experience. This is, in my opinion, what actually makes the skill tree so interesting, since there's really no single best one-size-fits-all tree that you can run. For the purposes of this video, we'll be building an all-rounder skill tree, built to handle everything from solo loot runs, farming trials and completing events, and wiping squads in PvP. We'll also take both new players into account, as well as those who have completed the previous expedition or are planning on doing the new one. Finally, if you have any other tips, suggestions, or best practices that you feel I missed in this video, then please feel free to drop those down in a comment below. We'll be hearting each of your messages. Without further ado, let's get into this video. Alright, so this is my current skill tree, and as you can see, I don't think it's all that bad, but there are a couple things that I would tweak. Now, we could reset my skill tree. It is not that expensive. We certainly have the funds for it, but the expedition is right around the corner, so I don't really want to waste my money since I'll need all the funds I can get in order to get the max amount of additional skill points once I complete the expedition. So instead, what we'll do instead of respecking is head on over into the Metaforge app to plan what our next skill tree is going to look like. Alright, so here we are in the Arc Raiders Metaforge app skill tree builder. First, we'll need to plan out a strategy for what we want out of our tree. There are a couple skills that I'd consider absolutely non-negotiables for any raider, no matter their playstyle. And this is, I think, pretty uncontroversial here. Mobility. In the mobility tree, first we have Marathon Runner. Moving around costs less stamina, as well as Youthful Lungs, which increases your max stamina. Obviously, we want to be getting around the map as efficiently as possible, and the fact that these are the first two in the mobility tree, again, non-negotiables. The next is over in the survival tree, which is Broad Shoulders, and this increases the maximum weight you can carry. I believe it's still 2 kilograms per skill point that you put in this for a maximum of an additional 10 kilograms of weight, which is huge. And last is over in the conditioning skill tree, and that's Loaded Arms. Your equipped weapon has less impact on your encumbrance, which is very good, especially in the mid to late game as you start taking in guns that, you know, either weigh more or you have 2 guns in your slotted in your equip slots. So absolutely huge, and it's only a 1-point skill. From here, we can start to plan out both the minimum amount of points we have to spend to get our must-haves and what we'll spend the remaining points on after, as well as our plan for how and when we'll unlock each skill. For points, we'll first need a minimum of 11 points to min-max our mobility tree with Marathon Runner and Youthful Lungs. We'll then need 21 points in survival to min-max Broad Shoulders, followed by 18 to min-max conditioning for Loaded Arms. This puts us at a total of 50 for our non-negotiables, leaving 26 points for new raiders and up to 36 for those who will have the maximum amount of points from the first and then second expedition. Finally, let's talk how much points we're going to spend in each tree and whether or not we're going to get any of the final skills at the end of each branch. For my money, I think Security Breach is still an incredibly useful skill, even in 2026, and is probably the best of the final skills. Now, I know this is kind of controversial, and a lot of people think that this skill is highly overrated, especially after the nerfs it's gotten, but I think the fact that there are actually less people with this skill running around actually makes looting these much more valuable, especially as the odds of finding one that hasn't been searched has only increased once people started respecking out of the survival tree. Additionally, even if there are less high-tier weapons and items found in the security breaches post-update, the chances of finding things like wolf packs, deadlines, and trailblazers are all worth the cost of admission. Plus, even if you find weapons you don't necessarily want, recycling them into simple gun parts or advanced mechanical components, for me, is always going to be a net positive, as I always welcome more of these in my stash. For this reason, I'm going to go for Security Breach once again after the expedition. Fair warning here that if you fully invest in a tree, you'll likely only have between 10 to 20 points to spare, respective to if you've done the expeditions. However, if a highly invested survival skill tree isn't for you, then the other skill I'd probably consider valuable enough to sink 36 skill points into a tree would probably be vaults on vaults on vaults on the mobility tree, since vaulting no longer costs stamina and is great for getting around, especially when running away from other PvP players or PvE arc. Alright, let's talk early game. Our first 11 points, like many others, are going to go on the left branch of the mobility tree, since we want the skills of Marathon Runner and Youthful Lungs. So we'll first spend 1 point into Nimble Climber to activate the left side of the tree, followed by 10 to max out Marathon Runner and Youthful Lungs. Our next step is to spend at least 15 points in the survival tree. We know our goal is to reach Broad Shoulders on the left side, which means we're going to be spending one of our skill points into Suffer in Silence in order to reach it. Suffer in Silence, while critically hurt, your movement makes less noise. It's only marginal, it's not much of a difference, but is still good to have. So we'll put 1 point into Agile Croucher. Your movement speed while crouching is increased. Very good to have, especially if you're sneaking up on someone in Stellamontes. Followed by 5 into Looter's Instincts. When searching a container, loot is revealed faster. This is great. This is absolutely great and will come into play later if we combine this with Looter's Luck. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Our next goal here is to unlock in-round crafting. I think this is great, especially if you run out of bandages mid-raid. You can always recycle items to turn into fabric and then turn into those gray bandages. Pretty solid to have, I think. So we'll put 1 into Revitalizing Squad and 1 into in-round crafting to unlock this. Next, to help us reach those 15 points, we're gonna max out Agile Croucher. Then spend 1 point into Silent Scavenger. For my money, I think this one is pretty negligible. You make less noise while looting. Realistically, even if you max this out, you can still hear other raiders breaching or searching items nearby, even if they're in another room. So I wouldn't worry about dumping a bunch of points into this one. Last, we'll spend another 2 into Revitalizing Squat in order to reach 15 points in Survival. Quick note that I probably wouldn't max out Revitalizing Squat, as I don't find it as useful as the description leads you to believe. In order for this one to activate, you have to stop moving for stamina regen to take effect. And in my case, and I'm sure many other cases, there aren't a ton of situations where we're fully crouched, needing our stamina to recover slightly faster. So for me, it's not really worth the 2 skill points we could use somewhere else. Finally, let's grab Suffer in Silence to round out the first couple of points. So now we're in what I'd consider the mid-game, or at least the early part of the mid-game. From here, you need to make a decision for what you value more from your Arc Raiders playstyle. If you're more PvP inclined, then I'd start investing points into the conditioning tree to work toward loaded arms. If you value the PvE and looting experience more, and subsequently want more in-game time putting Security Breach to use, then I'd work on finishing the survival tree, which for the purposes of this video is exactly what we're going to be doing. So first, we're going to spend 5 points on fully maxing out Broad Shoulders to get an additional 10 kilograms of carrying capacity, followed by another 5 points in Looter's Luck. Looter's Luck increases the chances of revealing loot 2 at a time. So with both Looter's Luck and Looter's Instincts fully maxed out, you'll be able to loot both containers and fallen raiders significantly faster. And for me, less time spent looking at a menu means less time I'm exposed to enemy players. From here, I'd spend the 1 point into Traveling Tinkerer to unlock more in-raid crafting items such as herbal bandages and Raider hatch keys. Then I'd go back and get Good as New to regain stamina while under a healing effect. Not only is this perk great while in PvP and PvE, but it also unlocks good skills on the right branch of the tree, such as Stubborn Mule and 3 Deep Breaths, which I think this one might actually be a little bit underrated. Since we want those 36 points, I'd first max out Stubborn Mule so that your stamina regeneration is less affected by being over encumbered. This is great for those high loot raids where you need to go to extract and don't have any adrenaline shots on you. And I know I'm not the only one who has needed to run away with a backpack full of loot while being chased by hornets or rocketeers. For your last 3 points, you have the option of investing either in 3 Deep Breaths or splitting it by also grabbing 1 Raider's Scraps. 1 Raider's Scraps will slightly increase the chance of finding field crafted items whenever looting containers like Raider hatches, ammo caches, and box tubes, while 3 Deep Breaths allows you to recover faster when an ability drains your stamina. Having this skill fully maxed out drops down the non-recovery period from 3 seconds down to 1 after fully draining your stamina bar. We'll then finish off our survival skill tree with Security Breach. Our next step is to spend the 15 points in the conditioning tree in order to work our way toward Loaded Arms. Because Loaded Arms is in the middle of the 3 final branches, we have to make a decision for which branch we'll want to focus. The way we do this is by seeing which perks on either side of the tree we find more valuable. In this case, Sky Clearing Swing, of dealing more melee damage to drones, and Effortless Swing, melee abilities cost less stamina, are significantly less valuable than Turtle Crawl, while downed you take less damage, and Downed but Determined. When you're downed, it takes longer before you collapse. So then, our plan is to unlock Survivor's Stamina. When you're critically hurt, your stamina regenerates faster. If we have the additional points later on, we can always go back and unlock Unburdened Roll anyway in the case we want to optimize a PvP playstyle. First, we're going to max out Used to the Weight since it's the most valuable of the initial skills. With this skill, wearing a shield doesn't slow you down as much. At this point, we should be equipping both medium and heavy shields pretty consistently for every raid anyway, so this is great to use in that mid-game. I would then work my way over to Proficient Prior. Breaching doors and containers takes less time. I'd put 1 skill point into Gentle Pressure. You make less noise when breaching. Again, another negligible skill in my opinion. Followed by 5 in Proficient Prior to speed up that process. To help us reach that 15 points, I would then put 1 into Blastborn. Your hearing is less affected by nearby explosions. Followed by 3 in Fight or Flight. When you're hurt in combat, regain a fixed amount of stamina and has a cooldown between uses. Our last step then is to grab Survivor's Stamina. So now we are in what I'd call the late game with only 12 points to go at a minimum for a new raider, or 22 points if you've done the first expedition and will do the second expedition. Because we want Loaded Arms as quickly as possible, we'll spend 1 to unlock a little extra. Breaching an object generates resources, which is great. This skill to me is actually pretty underrated anyway. There are many times, sure, when you're breaching objects, maybe you get some metal parts, you don't really need those at that time, but sometimes you do get things like steel springs, which we definitely always want in our stash to keep crafting mod for our weapons. So we'll grab a little extra and then get Loaded Arms. From here, you should have between 10 to 20 points left depending on your raider. There are a couple skills here I'd consider working toward depending on your playstyle. Downed but Determined and Turtle Crawl are great for when you go down in PvP, but is arguably playing for something that is situational. Still, these are good to pair with something like a pink looting augment in order to reach a nearby extract in the case you go down while in raid. The other to work toward is Vigorous Vaulter. This lets you vault at normal speed even if you run out of stamina. I'd do this by working my way up the left side of the mobility tree by first maxing out Nimble Climber and then picking up Carry the Momentum. The reason we'd want this one over Calming Stroll is that Calming Stroll requires you to walk in order to recover stamina faster. If you're on controller, this means you'll have to push your stick only halfway up, and if you're on PC, then you'll have to hit your walk toggle on your keyboard. There's just not a lot of moments, in my opinion, I'd want to slow down that much while trying to recover my stamina. We also don't want to really focus on this side of the mobility tree as, in my opinion, slip and slide is really only a marginal increase in slide distance that really the 5-point investment would be much better spent somewhere else on the tree. Carry the Momentum, on the other hand, is much more useful when fighting in PvE and PvP. After a sprint dodge roll, sprinting does not consume stamina for a short time. This is about a 1 to 2 second period, which admittedly isn't that long, but is enough to get away from any fight where you need to run away. From here, we'll spend 1 point in Crawl Before You Walk. When you're downed, you crawl faster, followed by grabbing Vigorous Vaulter for 1 point. From here, you can spend your remaining points on either Crawl Before You Walk, or in our case, Effortless Roll. That's 3 points for our dodge rolls, costing less stamina. All right, now let's talk extra points in the case that you've done the first expedition, and we'll be doing the second expedition, both for maximum skill points for an additional 10. For those that have the extra points, this is a great time to increase your survivability in PvP and PvE encounters. I'd first finish by maxing out Effortless Roll, followed by grabbing Unburdened Roll for whenever your shield breaks. In this case, your first dodge roll within a few seconds will not cost you any stamina. This is great for those high-intensity PvP battles, especially in Stellamontes. From here, I'd spend the remaining points, if any, on one of the other skills we either didn't acquire or fully max out. Downed but Determined, Turtle Crawl, and Crawl Before You Walk are all valuable options. Even just having 1 to 3 points is enough to see a noticeable difference with these perks over any of the others. And that is our all-rounder skill tree for both looting and PvP. Again, if you have any suggestions or tips for what skills you think are best, then please feel free to drop those down below in the comments. And let me know what you think of the second expedition. I know they lowered the cost to acquire additional skill points, but is hoarding stash value really the most fun way to get additional skill points? I don't know. Anyway, good luck topside. We'll see you in the next one.